Has anyone seen this quote before? The exact same stimulus has a completely different effect on an egg versus a potato. You see where we can go with this in our life. We all have certain stimuluses that we receive every day in our work and life. How it affects us is dependent on what your makeup is. So we have to determine what our makeup is. And many of the challenge we have, a lot of times we don't know. We think we know, we don't have a great sense of what it actually is. So really, really important to keep this in mind. Does anyone know what this number is?
Seconds in the day.
Correct. 86,400 seconds in the day. It's what we've got access to every single day. How we optimize those seconds is what makes us who we are. When we're talking with our elite athletes, this becomes priority number one. How are we optimizing every second of every day to achieve the goals that they set out to do? How do we apply that in your environment? We've got a lot of mixed groups in here. I know a little bit of the background of the room, and I know that we do have different folks here from different backgrounds and different environments and different stimuluses that are positive or potentially negative. The goal is how do we make those potentially most negative environments a little bit more manageable and more positive. Big part of this is we all have these plans because we don't really talk a lot about time. Time is finite. We have what we have. Our bigger factor is we have to optimize the challenging environments. The better you do in your challenging environments, the better you do overall. And that's where you've got to put your energies. The positive environments, we all do pretty well in those. So a lot of what we're going to discuss is adversity, how we can focus on that in an effective way, and what strategies we can implement and what we use with our athletes. So to give you a little background on me, just to frame where I've come from and the perspective I have when we look at this, we do everything through a lens of research and data. So we monitor, manage every little detail we possibly can with the folks we work with. We've done this for many, many years now in teams, in leagues. I've worked with over 30 universities. So worked in academic environments, worked in corporate environments, worked at a Fortune 50 company, from the inside. So I understand a lot of the challenging environments that you all have to deal with. So I don't want this to be an environment where it's a lot of talk without any practical application. The goal is to have specifics around it. So I want to thank one of my mentors. Billie Jean King has been a phenomenal mentor for a number of reasons. And the reason you'll see in a little bit why this is important to me and why this makes a difference in what we're going to be talking about. I've had the fortune to deal with the tallest tennis player in the top 10 in the history of the sport, and also played the longest match ever, played a 3-day tennis match. So any of you that play tennis, try to play tennis straight for 3 days. It's not very easy. And again, how do you prepare an individual for an environment like that? And how do you then recover from an environment like that? Worked with the NCAA. Dr. Brian Hainline's been a big mentor of mine. He's the Chief Medical Officer for the NCAA. So we deal directly with some of the biggest issues we see in the collegiate sports environment, from the illness issues to the health issues. What do you think is the number one issue student athletes face today? Injury? Could be a good guess, but it really isn't. It's actually mental illness. Mental illness is the number one challenge they have. And we see the same thing in corporate environments. Though a lot of what we deal with actually ties into how do we improve perspective. Because a lot of this comes back to your perspective on the exact same situation. Goes back to the egg and the potato. Worked at PepsiCo and dealt with a number of unique environments that are probably pretty similar to what a lot of you are dealing with. Corporate cultures that are challenging. You have tiers of bureaucracy that you have to get through. The inability to move quickly. The inability to make decisions and make a difference with what you're trying to accomplish. So how do we approach that, and how do we do the best we can? Because we know corporate cultures aren't changing rapidly. They're one of those things that they have a lot of great things about them, having a large number of people working together. The problem is when you get a large number of people working together, you're going to have difference of opinions, different strategies, different goals, and how do we work within that environment? So we'll talk a little bit about what great teams can do and what they have and how we can make sure we do that in the right way. From an advising standpoint, we deal a lot with technology and integrating technology into workplace environments to make them better. In the sports world, for example, how do we get someone to drink on a more consistent basis to improve performance? From a medical device standpoint, dealing with pain and dealing with the pain response, improving performance from that standpoint. Working in a strength training environment to improve mobility and allow you to train in an environment that allows the muscle to work without putting as much strain on the bony structures, which has been a challenge to accomplish. Wearable muscle monitors, and this will tie into how you can all do a better job of monitoring yourself. We're trying to analyze the muscles, the activity levels, the physiology of each individual to ensure that we're not missing important chunks of the day that can make a difference. And I'll ask you guys in a little bit some questions around that. Dealing with, let me walk through some of these quickly because I want to take you to, anyone know Dansby? He's the shortstop for the Atlanta Braves. So we've been working with Dansby for the last couple of months, getting him back, ready to play. He had his first outing in spring training yesterday, so super excited to see him back. He had a surgery about 7 months ago on his wrist, coming back, and he's an example of an athlete that does a lot of things right. He understands the 86,400 concept really well, taking care of the little details, the second-by-second detail to get you back. So now, let's talk about you guys, because that's why we're here, about what can we really do. And one of the biggest challenges in the environments you guys live in is this concept about how do we avoid burnout and optimize our work and life performance, because that's really what a lot of this comes down to. The first step we have to understand is this stress awareness. Do you have an awareness of where your stresses are truly coming from? And most people have the broad scale aspects. I don't like this person, my boss sucks, I have too much work, I don't have enough time. Those general framework discussions, but dig a little deeper, figuring out where your actual stresses are coming from. If you did a stress pie chart for your week, try to map out where all your major stresses are and put a percentage to them over the course of your week. It's a great exercise to do, because then you start realizing, one, what you think is a stress. When you look back on it 4 days later and do a review, you realize what pissed me off on Monday really wasn't a big deal. You know, by the time it gets to Friday, you're like, that really didn't make a difference. But it's a great exercise. We do this with our athletes from a standpoint of how they train and how they eat, because we do a diet recall. This is exactly the same thing for your emotions and your stress level. So do a stress analysis to figure out where are your daily and weekly stresses coming from. Then you've got to be able to monitor your fatigue, meaning what's draining you. We all know things that drain us, and we all know things that excite us and give us energy. Do you have a clear sense of what drains you and what gives you energy? So introverts, typically, the moment you put them in a room like this and they have to then talk with a bunch of people, they get pretty drained. Extroverts, you put them in a room by themselves and lock the door and say, hey, I need you to finish that project. They get really drained after an hour of doing that. Open office concepts are great for extroverts, are terrible for introverts. So we have to understand who you are, that's just one example, but understand your fatigue and where it potentially is coming from. Renaming your emotions. That comes back to the potato and the egg example again. We all get the same response. How are we naming those emotions? And we'll talk through some ways to change your language a little bit. This 1% objective concept is something that we preach every single day, because we can't change the world tomorrow, we can't change your life tomorrow, but we can do 1% better. What's that 1% that you're going to do? Focus in on it, make it a goal, write it down, get it done. Everyone can do something, and again, up to you as to what that's going to be, but we have to have that 1% objective. 10 minutes will change your life. This is a very simple concept, similar to that 1% objective. It's manageable, it's bite-sized, everyone's got 10 minutes. Find it, block it off, put it in the calendar, and make sure that it's implemented. If you can implement 10 minutes a day, that 10 minutes turns into 12, it turns into 14. You have to stick with it, but you have to commit to it. How many of you sleep pretty well? Okay, about 1/20th of the room raised their hands there. So it wasn't a great number. So most of us have challenges with sleep. We'll talk a little bit about strategies to it. How many of you sleep more than 8 hours a night? Okay, if I was to say, well, you should sleep 8 to 10 hours a night, that's what all the research says. Except my elite athletes who do, they sleep 10 plus hours a night because it's a major part of their training is sleep. But for anyone that works in the corporate world that we deal with, most of them are sleeping between 3 and 5 hours a night. That's their normal sleeping schedule. And these are C-level executives of some of the biggest companies. And they function great. So it's not a valid factor of their fatigue. So what does it come down to? One, it's their makeup. They're built for this. There are certain people that are genetically built for that and can function great. But there's also a lot of other things they do throughout the day to optimize it. And their goal is to wake up. A lot of people's goal is to sleep as long as they can. You should see my wife. On the weekends, she'll sleep till 11 or 12. That's her goal. Her goal is to sleep as long as possible. So I'm usually up at 5 or 6 most days, even on the weekend. And it's just a goal. It's just something you want. You've got stuff to do. So it's just a difference in focus and a difference in what are you trying to accomplish. And then this last concept, pressure is a privilege. If you're feeling stress and pressure, hopefully you feel it as a privilege, not as a burden. If you're feeling it as a burden, we've got a big problem with what you're doing. You have to analyze what you're doing and why. The greats feel the same pressure you feel, but they see it as a privilege. It's an honor to have that pressure because it means you're doing something impactful, meaningful. There's an outcome that is relying on you to achieve it. So you have to ask yourself, how can I create my environment where that precious scenario that happens, how do I see myself as that's an honor, that's a privilege to be in that environment? And it's hard sometimes, I understand, depending on what it is. Sometimes it's just someone else had nothing to do with you, planned poorly, let something in the last minute, and then you get that email or call at 4:30 saying, I need something by the end of the day because this or this is not going to work. And then you've got an hour or less to figure out and solve a problem. How many times does that happen? That happens to me at least once or twice a week, where someone else screwed up basically, and then it gets thrown on you because you're usually able to do some stuff. What do they say? If you want a project done, give it to a busy person. That's usually what happens. So if you're competent and you've got skills and you're known to get stuff done, you're usually going to be asked to get more stuff done. So you have to be careful about how you set that up and you provide feedback on those scenarios. But also utilize that as you're given that responsibility because they think you can get it done. So there's some privilege in that. Even though it sucks at the time, in the long run, you're seen as a valuable person in the environment because you're able to accomplish some of that. Okay, so what are your biggest challenges? If you were going to take it right down, if you can write down on your phone or if you've got pen and paper, write down 3 or 4 of your biggest challenges right now. So work-related predominantly. So if you write down, just do a 30 seconds, single words or a couple words that really come to mind, top of mind, you feel like are your biggest challenges in your work environment right now. Big picture stuff. Not like I got a nasty email 20 minutes ago and I'm fuming. Like big picture things that really are making a difference. Because in the healthcare space especially, there's a lot of challenges. You guys have a lot of issues related to an old business model with very new technology coming in, and how is that integrated? And that's one of the hardest industries to be in, is when you've got a model that is financially doing great, but there's a lot of shifts and movement and paradigms that are changing, and how is that affecting you? So this was some of the biggest challenges in the healthcare space in general for 2018. So surveyed doctors, healthcare administrators, nurses, pretty much tried to get a cross-section of the environment to figure out what were the biggest challenges. Any of these on your list? You see a handful of these? So it's pretty consistent. probably a few things that you're like, yeah, I probably wouldn't have put that at the top of my list because I don't work in that environment, but it makes sense. So if these are consistent themes that come up across the industry, what are our solutions? That's what we want to be about. Problems are easy to point at. You know, you've heard about a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. Fixed mindset is, I'm the victim mentality, things are happening to me, I can't change it, it is what it is. Whereas a growth mindset is, I have the ability to adapt, I'm looking for solutions, I'm trying to find answers to problems. And that's really the biggest difference. The best athletes are all growth mindset athletes. Fixed mindset athletes die off. They struggle to get levels better because they may have the physical talent, they don't have the emotional or mental talent to fight through problems. Same thing in your environments. If you've got a fixed mindset, you're going to struggle. You're always going to get frustrated with scenarios. If you've got a growth mindset, you're going to look at your problems and say, okay, what are our opportunities? And that's where we've got to make sure that we focus in on, is those opportunities to make a difference. So here's some tactics to reduce burnout. Take a look at these. This is what you've probably been told. Provide flexible scheduling, part-time work, more work-life balance, all the buzzwords that are there for a reason, because that's what the research tells us could help. Why hasn't it really helped? If you look around every industry, they're saying they're more overworked than ever, they have less time than ever, even though all these things are being provided to you or the information's being provided. So the biggest challenge here is these are external factors. They're time-based factors, most of them. Time-based change isn't the issue. Your time is not your problem. The issue is how you perceive your time and where you put value. You're not putting value on the extra time that you're spending. If you were putting value on that and you felt like it was truly making a difference and being impactful, you would have a different response to it. So it's not about what is real, it's about what is perceived. And your question is, how are you perceiving it? The people that are loving their work environment, they don't see this work-life balance as an issue. Work is their life, life is their work. There's a crossover, there's an intersection, there's an ability to do both and function both at a really high level. The folks that truly separate, this is work, this is life, and I'm two different people in and out of that, that's where you see a lot of the challenges. And I know for many of you, it's hard. You have a lot of life commitments that are very important, more important than your work commitments. But we have to determine, why does the work commitments maybe take such a back step sometimes? Possibly it's the environment that you've created or you're within that isn't as productive as it could be. And it could be little things. You've got to, that's why going through that stress analysis is so important. Because if you can go through your stress analysis and figure out where your big pain points are, you can potentially change those pretty easily. If you notice that always between 3 and 5 in the afternoon, that's when everything hits the fan and that's when all the bad stuff happens generally. Late in the day, people need stuff done, you're the one they go to. You may reschedule your environment where that 3 to 5 period is an environment where you let people know, I don't respond to emails after 4 p.m. For that environment, because that will change their behavior. In some scenarios that may not be possible, I understand there's emergencies, but as a general rule, you can change other people's behavior by providing some, information to them that makes it simple. And I've done that plenty of times. People I work with, I'll say, these are the hours I'll respond, these are the hours I won't. If it's a complete emergency, let me know. But it better be a complete emergency. So usually people will respect that most of the time. So the question for all of us is, do you know your why? So why are you doing what you're doing? That's the simple answer. You have to be able to answer that and say, because I love the work, I find value in the work, and I'm making a difference somewhere. And if you really can't answer those 3 questions, you have to analyze, is this the best environment for it? It's because it's true. If you can optimize those 3 questions, it makes your why more important. You know, if you're working for the weekends, that's where it's really hard to make a big impact on you, because you'll always be doing that. Your job is your job, and everything else is why you're working. We got to try to find a better balance. To me, work-life balance is work and life is more integrated, and that's the great ones. Anyone that's very successful, their work and life is integrated. They don't completely separate out. The folks that completely separate out, they're the ones a lot of the time that do struggle a little bit. And then you've got to ask yourself why. Why do you want to separate those out? Is it that the work is that stressful, that uncomfortable, that when you're away from it, you don't want to think about it at all? Whereas, you know, the true leaders, the ones that make great change and impact others and truly change the world, that's all they're thinking about. And they're obsessed in other ways. I'm not saying they're great people many times, because they're not, but their work and life are integrated well because it allows them to optimize that aspect. The challenge is, if you want to be truly exceptional, it's really hard to do both. Same with an athlete. The best in the world all have demons, all have challenges, all have vices, all have insecurities that push them to be great. So it's one of those things. It's saying if you want to be completely abnormal, you have to be completely abnormal. You have to train abnormally. You have to do things that are abnormal. If you want to just be on the upper spectrum, which I think is a healthier place for most people to be in, then there's still a lot of things you want to do, but you don't want to take it to the extreme. So this is sort of where we focus in on. We have these 6 areas that we make sure our athletes and our executives focus in on. So you have this train to perform concept. This is the daily work you do. You know, every day is a performance. Every single day of your life you're performing in some capacity. Training to win is like that last stage of your performance, where you're performing most of the time. That's your training. Training to win is closing the deal, getting that last thing over the line, making a big project come to its finish, giving a big presentation to the board, securing funding, whatever it is, that's your training to win. Then you have to train and recover from that, because there's ups and downs, and your ups take a lot of effort to perform at a high level. When you're coming down off that, you've got to have a strategy to optimize your recovery. Training to fuel is that nutrition piece. How do you fuel yourself for optimizing your behavior? Really, really important. Don't think of it as diet. Think of it as fueling. It's a very, very important difference. We're not talking about cutting foods, throwing this in, throwing that out. It's about how do we fuel so that you can optimize your energy levels throughout the day, feel good for the 86,400 seconds, not that you feel good for 2 hours of the day only. That's what we're trying to accomplish. Training to move, this is lifestyle. This is making sure that your hips don't hurt, your back doesn't hurt, you can walk up and down stairs. You just literally can function and do your job well and do your life well. It's not being a great athlete, it's just feeling good about yourself. And then training to succeed. When all these things are done together, then we're truly at that top 1%, and that's when you're able to truly train for success. Until you get to that point, all these, top line things that we're trying to accomplish are really hard to do until we've got those other 5 areas taken care of. So we focus in on those other 5 areas. So your stress fatigue monitoring. Please do your stress recall today, tomorrow, the next day. You'll be amazed at how valuable it is. So just analyze this week, every day, at the end of the day, write down approximately how much time you were stressed and fatigued on certain projects and why. And just analyze it and try to do a pie chart at the end of the week, and you'll figure out very quickly, hey, 70% of the stuff I get frustrated with is all in the same area, or it's all related to the same person. So if it's a person issue, which most of the time it is, you've got to solve that. You've got to have that sit down, and you've got to show them and come in and be like, hey, I get stressed a lot around this environment. It's on me. You got to own it because you're getting stressed. They may not even think anything of it. Most of the time they don't. They're communicating how they always communicate. They're just doing their job on their normal daily basis, and they don't think anything of it. It's not their problem most of the time. Nearly all the time it's your problem. It's your way of perceiving what they do to you. But there are ways that you can maybe allow them to realize it's having a bigger effect on you than you realize. Because if you don't take the personality piece into account with all this stuff, anything we do, we're still going to run into the roadblock. So we've got to make sure that you always own the issue. Even though it may not be 100% your issue, we know, it's a saying I really like, doesn't matter how thin the pancake is, there's always two sides. It's a really, really good concept because to every disagreement, to every personality conflict, there is two sides to it, but you can only control your side. So you've got to make sure you optimize your strategy for that. Does anyone know the answer to this question? Number one differentiator between a high-performing individual and others, so non-high-performing individuals. And this is from the research literature. The number one term that you see is the resiliency, the ability to be resilient. How do you handle a stressful, tough, challenging environment? The high performers love that. They handle that on a daily basis. They expect it. They want that. That's a sign that stuff's happening. Disruptors. You look at anyone that's been a disruptor, they're highly resilient. To be a disruptor, you have to go through a lot of failure to achieve success. So in your environment, ask yourself, how resilient are you? And some of you may be, I'm not. I hate it. I get really stressed every time something bad happens, and I really don't have great coping skills. Well, if you're at that point, that's awesome, because that, at least you've admitted it. It gives you a chance to then find solutions to it. If you don't really know, that's where that stress fatigue analysis comes in really handy. So again, this word, if you're going to take one word away from this entire talk today, make sure that you use resiliency a few times a week when you're talking to yourself. So that self-talk is really important to ask yourself, how resilient am I? Do I have a growth mindset, and am I resilient? If you can have both of those, you're going to do a lot better tomorrow than you did today. And that's going to continue day after day after day. It's a cumulative effect. If you can do this and live this lifestyle with this mindset, you're going to have this improvement over and over again. So how do we build resiliency? Again, research-based information about how to accomplish this. Emotional intelligence is a big one. Some of you may have done some EI courses. You understand the concept. Basically, it's thinking before you speak most of the time. Make sure that you understand how you can communicate, what your person that you're dealing with may be thinking or responding before you say it. Have an emotional awareness is a big part of this. Energy management, that's where we spend the majority of our time. We're not trying to improve your time, we're trying to improve your energy. We know you're going to work 8, 10, 12 hours a day. That's not changing. But if we can get you more productive in that time period by having greater energy, greater focus, that's where we spend our time. And that's how we work with our executives. It's about how do we fuel better, how do we sleep better, how do we provide you more energy through various means of exercise, supplementation, working through opportunities to make sure we optimize you so you can work for 14 hours at a high level rather than 14 hours where about 6 of those hours are unproductive. Connections, that's the people piece of this. You've got to make sure you surround yourself with the people that are most like where you want to be. You've heard this before. Your closest circle of 5, you're basically the average of those most of the time. And look around yourself and ask yourself, is this an optimum circle for me to be around for where I want to go? Am I spending the most amount of time with people that are going to make me better and that I have an environment and a skill set and a personality that I most want to be like? If you're negative, you surround yourself with negative people. If you're positive, you surround yourself with positive people. Like finds like. That's normal. That's human nature. But you've got to ask yourself, is your core group making you better or making you worse? Perspective. That's where all this comes back to. This comes back to our ability to see the same situation from a lens of productivity, growth, and the ability to look at everything as an opportunity rather than the negative of those. Then what are your purpose, strengths, and values? Because those three things define who we are, and to have great resiliency, this goes back to your why. It goes back to that concept of, if you know your why, then your purpose, values, and strengths are aligned well, and you're very clear on why we're here. So some concepts to really take note of, because if you do these 5 things well, you're going to have unbelievably good resiliency. We do these with our athletes, because our athletes are some of the worst at this. Because they're so genetically gifted physically that it's got them to such a high level that they haven't trained these other factors very well. So for them to get from top 100 in the world to top 10 in the world to number 1 in the world, that jump's huge. It's a massive difference, and they don't realize it. They get to 100 in the world pretty easily, some of these genetically gifted folks. They haven't had to do much. They haven't had to train that hard. They haven't had to eat right. They haven't had to do a lot of things most normal people need to do. They get to that point, and then they hit a roadblock. And they have never had the training to break through that. And many of them don't. Many of them are not willing to go through these things to become more resilient. So they get stuck, and that's a shame. And we see that every single day, and you can predict it. You can predict it from day one, which athletes are going to get stuck and which athletes are going to break through by how they approach their work. And it's the same thing in corporate environments. The individuals that want to get better, they search out how do they improve these areas. The ones that don't complain a little more. They moan a lot. They complain. They don't have a growth mindset. So really, really think on that as we talk through it. This is a great example of what we're talking about. So this concept of I was lucky, or I was just in the right place at the right time, or something good happened to me. No, it was just like, this is what great athletes always have in common. I control my destiny, I put the work in, I find solutions, I get better. And that's a great way to live, because when you fail, it's on you. When you succeed, it's on you. The hardest part for most people to do is to own failure. Because owning failure means you have to admit that you're not as good as you probably thought you were, someone may have told you were, or you're trying to protect your ego. So a lot of people would much rather say, hey, it wasn't my day today, I had an injury, I didn't try my best, and that was why I lost. Those people rarely make it to the top. They really don't. Because they're always putting up reasons for failure that are external to them, rather than saying, hey, I gave it everything I had, I just wasn't able to win today. Tomorrow is another day, I know what I'm going to work on, and I'm going to get better in those areas. So really, really valuable to make sure that we try to work through these. And these concepts apply across industries. How many of you do blood work? Most people, at least from a physical, I would assume. How many of you do it more than once a year from a performance perspective? Anyone in here? Not really? Okay, so we do blood work for most of the folks we deal with once a month, and at the very least once every 3 months. Reason being is we do it for performance purposes. So we're trying to optimize an athlete's performance. From an executive standpoint, we're trying to optimize energy levels and productivity. So this area is moving pretty quick. Some of you may be dealing with this in your environments, but we go through a bit more intensive blood panel than a typical physical. We're looking at factors that may improve brain function a little better. We're looking at oxygen capacity factors. How can we improve red blood cell count higher? How do we improve iron levels above and beyond potentially just base levels to improve oxygen flow? Things like that. And a lot of it's on the athlete side, but some of the same things happen on the general corporate side on how can we improve energy levels. Because if we can just give you more energy, just generally, irrespective of what you're going to use it for, it makes you better. That's it. That's all we're trying to do. How do we make sure that your human physiology is as optimized as possible? And ask yourself, are you optimizing your human physiology as best as you can? And none of us are. I'm not, you're not. There's so many opportunities that we leave on the table. So the goal is, how do we do the best we can to work through that? So remaining calm under pressure. So here's a few factors that you want to make sure we focus on. Understanding your biochemistry. So understanding your blood work, understanding your stress zones, understanding what makes you tick. Most of us don't understand ourselves very well, yet we want to do all these things, but we don't really understand what's working and what's not working. So do an analysis. Label your emotions and change or interrupt your feedback loops. Because emotions are what our perspective is. Remember, reality and perspective are the same things based on who you are. So we have to make sure we can label our emotions effectively and then change the feedback loops on the bad parts. And I'll give you a couple kind of ways we work on that. Pretty simple things. It's just changing language, because most of us deal with things through language. That's how we've been trained. That's how the schools are set up. Everything's trained us to work through language. So we better use language to our advantage, not as a negative. Slow your breathing. Simple concept. Does anyone know in 15 seconds how quickly I can drop your heart rate with good breathing technique? So with our athletes, we do this a ton. You know, when they go up at, say, 180 beats a minute during a training session, and we go through a breathing routine, we can drop them from 180 to 140 in about 20 seconds, which is really, really important for what they do. If they don't go through the right breathing routine, they go from 180 to 170 in the same time. And that's a difference exponentially in their world, from being able to train harder and longer, being able to recover better, having better cognitive function, being able to make sure that they don't make as many mistakes. That can be applied directly to your world. Because if you're feeling stressed, your heart rate's racing, you're on an uncomfortable phone call, someone sent you a nasty email, got to go through your 20-second breathing routine. So from a standpoint of how to do or what to do, the simplest thing we do, and it's pretty old school, is block one nostril. Try it out here. Block one nostril and breathe through your nose, hold for 3 seconds, and then breathe out through your mouth. Take 3 seconds to breathe out. 3 in, 3 out. That's it. But make sure you hold one nostril the entire time. What's that doing? All we're doing is we're slowing airflow in. It's forcing us to slow down. It's slowing our processing down. So it's a really, really simple strategy you can do anywhere. It's the best strategy to work with, especially when your heart rate's racing. Really, really good way to slow things down. And it's simple, easy to do, doesn't look too weird. You can do it during a meeting. You can just cover your nose a little bit, so you can kind of lean on it a little like that. So there's a few ways you can do it when people are around, but it's definitely something that can be productive. Rename and rebrand your emotions. When we're saying branding your emotions, it's about what does it mean to you. Because we all think of the same word a little bit differently based on our context, our environment, how we grew up, how our parents use these terms. All these things create language challenges. And remember, we think in language, we see in color, but we think in language. So we have to make sure that our language is optimized. So how do we deal with language? This is burnout words, and this is resiliency words. So someone that's going through burnout has this response. They feel withdrawn. They want to be away from whatever that stress is. They just want to avoid it. Resilient folks look at that and say, I want to be present. So we have to change our withdrawn emotion into being present. How do you do that? That's where the challenge is many times. You have to have a strategy to do that. You're emotionally exhausted. Everyone's been there. The people that have been there, though, they're working on a project they don't really want to work on. If they're working on a project they really want to be involved in and really think is value-based and is really providing an outcome that's positive, you don't usually see emotionally exhausted people. Doesn't matter how hard the project is. They can go 3 days straight, all day, every day, and they may crash, they may be tired, but they're not emotionally exhausted. So really important to understand where this exhaustion is coming from. A lot of the time it's how this project or this work is being presented and how you're being rewarded for it. Energized. That's the environment we have to create. We have to create an energized environment based on incentives, based on structure, based on the environment. So the folks that are in here that are leading people, that are managing staff, you know when you see emotionally exhausted staff, you know what those symptoms are. You've got to ask yourself, that's a little bit on me now. Remember, before I said if you're feeling emotionally exhausted or frustrated or stressed, that's on you. It is. But if you see a staff member who is exhibiting some of these, as a manager and a leader, that's on you to find solutions as well. It goes back to that whole growth mindset, and I've got the control to change the environment for good or for bad. So use it. It's a skill, it's an opportunity, it's something that you can truly make a difference in, but you've got to own it and see it and try to use it. So individuals that feel defeated are on their pathway to burnout. Individuals that have this concept of, hey, I got beat up today pretty good, or this week, or that project wasn't much fun. But that's cool. That's why I'm here. I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm ready for the next challenge. I'm bouncing back. That's just like losing in sport. That's all it is. It's exactly the same thing. Yesterday sucked, today's another day. I got an opportunity to learn, figure out what I didn't do well or what I didn't like about that previous project, and now I've got the ability to bounce back. Brittle and rigid, you want to be bendable. You know, bendable is being resilient. Bendable is that ability to turn a negative environment into a positive. So one of the biggest challenges with most individuals is they really have a hard time outside their comfort zone. So you've got to determine, one, what your comfort zone is, and two, how far outside you're willing to step. If you're not willing to step much outside your comfort zone, understand the role that you can play in the organization then. Don't be put in situations where you're going to fail. If you know in yourself that if I get put too far outside my comfort zone, I'm going to struggle, I'm not going to enjoy it, I'm not going to be successful, that's fine. That's being honest about your strengths and not your weaknesses, but it's your opportunities. No one has weaknesses, they just have opportunities to change, either avoid. If you know it's not going to be a good result if you're put in that situation, don't get put in that situation. And as a manager or a leader in here, that's on you as well. You don't put a technical expert in a managerial or leadership role normally. That's dumb on both ends, and that happens every single day at companies all over the world. You have some technical expert that's skilled in an area. It could be in accounting, it could be in research, it could be in billing, it could be in any area, and you say, hey, you've done a great job, I'm promoting you to managing 5 staff in that area. And then what happens? They are stressed out, they don't know how to manage, you've never taught them how to manage, they have no skills in leading or managing, and now you've lost 2 people. You've got a bad boss who's probably going to screw up the 5 people that they're managing, plus you just lost a great technical expert who's now not doing their technical expertise. And that happens in every industry. It's one of the biggest problems we see when we go into these companies and we do this type of work with the executives. That's one of the first questions, is what's your incentive systems for promotion for individuals that are technically skilled that never and should never be in leadership or management roles. That's not what they're skilled for, and that's not where their best use of time is. So, whose fault is that? That's typically the person trying to do the right thing. That person's done a great job. The only obvious promotional opportunity is move them into a higher role that manages people, but that's not the best role for that person in many respects. Okay, this concept of treading water, punching the clock. Okay, I'm going to try to do as little as possible and just get through the day. Okay, so that's challenging as well. You know, you feel bad if you feel like that. That's not a great place you want to be in long term. Okay, for a week here or there may be times where you do that. But if this is ongoing, we've got to ask yourself: 1, are you in the right place? But 2, if you're in a good place and you like a lot of things about what you're doing, it sounds like your projects maybe, or what you're working on, isn't really making it function well. So we've got to move forward. Moving forward is either moving out, meaning find something else that's more productive within or outside the current structure you're in, or just rework it a little bit to make sure that what was good 6 months ago, find how you can get back to that environment. Because this is one of the biggest warning signs is, usually you lose these employees anyway. They either leave, go to another company, or they get so frustrated that their managers say, hey, they're doing a bad job and we got to fire them. But it's usually not that it's a bad employee, especially if the employee was good previously. So you have to make sure you're monitoring that well. So renaming your emotions. Fear to anticipation. Everyone feels this emotion. The ones that do the best are the ones that are using anticipation response rather than a fear response. A fear response is avoid, get away, I can't handle it, I don't want to handle it. Anticipation is I don't know what's coming up, but I'm looking forward to it. It's growth mindset, it's opportunistic, it's going to be better tomorrow than it is today. That mindset is hard to do. But why do you see that, say, in stock market investing? You've heard of fear of missing out. Anyone buy Bitcoin when it went through the roof? So anyone that did that was in anticipation mode. They weren't in fear mode. Things like that you had that emotion that you're like, hey, I don't know what's going to happen, but I want to be part of it. The fear mode is, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to be really bad, so I want to avoid it. Much rather live in the world of anticipation than in the world of fear. If you're wrong, not the end of the world on the anticipation side. If you're wrong on the fear side, you've been going through it unnecessarily. There was a great study, probably about 30 years ago now, where they looked at emotions, tried to monitor individuals' emotions for a week, and they found that about 70% of the negative emotions that people had never actually came true. Meaning that the fear, the worry, the stress that they were thinking was going to happen was all future-based. What's this person going to think of me? Or what's going to happen if I call this person? Or what's going to happen if I don't do this? The what's going to happen question of what could happen, that over 70% of time was spent on things that never actually happened. And that still happens today. If you go through your stress analysis, you'll see a lot of it relates to that. Living in the fear world rather than anticipation world. Frustration to desire. We all have frustrations, no doubt about it. We want that. The athletes, the biggest way we get them better is we put them into frustrating situations. We make them fail. We fail them every single day. That's my job. My job is to make people fail. Every single day that I work with athletes, we fail them. Because that's how you get them better. You need to know where their endpoints are. You need to know where their weaknesses are so that you can improve them. The great ones think of it exactly the same. They look at that failure and say, man, I was close. Next week I'm going to get that right. Otherwise, you get people that just get pissed off, break rackets, throw things, get really frustrated without the improvement part. You've got to think like that as well. Worry versus concern. So from this standpoint, it goes back to the fear aspect. Everyone has these emotions. It's normal. We've got to change the severity of them. Worry is on the extreme, constant worrying. Concern is like, okay, there could be a risk here. That's okay. That's strategic planning. We have a risk, we have a concern. Now, what are we going to make sure we put around that to ensure that we have the best possible outcome? So having concern is not a negative, but we've got to have a strategy to fix it. That's where the difference is. So flustered and dread. Put these together a little bit. Because dread is caution, meaning that, hey, if your emotion is that bad, there's probably something that you've got to deal with. Step cautiously. Figure out what the limitation is here. Because you don't want to jump off a bridge if there's no water there at the bottom. You've got to be smart about it. Flustered versus excited. This is really one of those ones where it's the same emotion. You know, nerves. People say nerves a lot in sports. They were nervous. You know, pressure. So great ones feel the same nerves, feel the same pressure that all of us do. What's the difference? They're excited by that sensation, whereas many of us are really scared by that same sensation. That's what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to rename your emotions so that exact same scenario that you deal with, you get a completely different response. Same thing here. Alarmed versus curious. We have to make sure that we're always looking on the positive side of it. You know, the concept of be a positive person. Most people think of that more so as, you know, I just want to say good things. But when it goes deep down, many positive people that seem to be positive on the outside that you deal with, a lot of them emotionally aren't very positive. They say a lot of the right things verbally, but emotionally they don't necessarily respond the same way. You want to emotionally be that positive person. How you communicate it is a good piece of that, but you've got to make sure it's deeper than that. So this 1% objective. The goal is you walk out of any of these type of talks, and I've sat in the audience for hundreds of these from all sorts of different people, and the goal is what are 5 nuggets that you can walk away with. Hopefully you've got at least 5 already. The 1% objective one is a real obvious one. This one is just, what can you do that makes you 1% better today? Do you have something right now that you know, if I did this today, it would make me 1% better? It could be, you know, how you prepare to go to bed, and I'll teach you how to do that, some strategies to sleep a little better, get to sleep quicker. It could be something to do with your fueling strategy. It could be how much water you drink. It could be, okay, I'm going to exercise a little bit more today for energy level purposes. Again, I'm not talking about health. Health's a different question. We know what we probably need to do for health. I'm talking purely about performance. What exercise techniques do you implement to improve your performance? So remember, increasing heart rate by 20%. So if your resting heart rate right now, let's say you're at 80 beats a minute at the moment. You know, if we can get you to about 100 to 120, somewhere in that ballpark, in 30 seconds to a minute, just, you know, basically anything that you can do, air squats, arms above your head, whatever works for you, that gives you immediate energy. It's the easiest, simplest way to give you a boost of energy. And it takes 20 seconds. Most people in this room can do it. It's one of those things that we don't utilize enough. There's a great study that was just published by Johnson & Johnson about 2 years ago. They did it with New Balance, the footwear company, and they did a study looking at on the hour, every hour, in the New Balance headquarters. They would ring a bell, and it doesn't matter what you were doing. If you were on a conference call, a board meeting, whatever it was, you would have to do exercise, some form, for 2 minutes every hour. 2 minutes on the hour, and they did that for a month, and they monitored a bunch of physiological variables. They monitored a bunch of emotional characteristics, wellness scores. Across the board, everything went up. Health scores went up, body composition metrics went up, emotional wellness scales went up. Every single metric they looked at went up in this environment. And it was literally 2 minutes, about 8 hours, 16 minutes a day total. 2 minutes on the hour every hour, and it was a cultural experiment for the group. They're an active community, it's New Balance, they're an active brand, that's what they do, but the concept is relevant across all industries. So it could be something to think about, depending on where you are and what your role is, implementing something like that. And again, some people say, well, that wouldn't work in our environment. And you've got to ask yourself, why wouldn't it work? This is a pretty good sized company. New Balance is a pretty large company. They have C-level executives all the way to seasonal hourly workers, and they had everyone across their spectrum engaged in it, and it was a cultural requirement. It was required. So pretty neat study, but that was a 1% better. Wasn't a big deal when it comes down to it. It didn't change anyone's life in the short term, but in the long run it made a huge difference. Big thing we have to do when we talk about this stuff is we've got to keep it real. We can't turn this into this. It's not possible. So we have to be really realistic about what we can do and what we can't do. From a standpoint of, I can't stand up here and say, I'm going to turn you into the #1 golfer in the world in a month. Can't do that. Not realistic. It takes decades to get to that level, and you've got to have the genetic ability to start with. So the last thing you want to do is try to convince yourself that certain things are possible when they're not. The people that say anything's possible, that's BS. Anything's not possible. What is possible is slow, gradual improvement that over time becomes massive change. And we have to be realistic about that. That's where the 1% improvement is so important, because we can manage that. We can't say, hey, in a year, I want to be president of the country, or I want to be president of my company, and it's your first month on the job. You know, you have to be realistic about where we're going, what we're doing, and how to get there. Interesting concept here. This book was written in 1880, and their biggest health recommendations in 1880 was squats and planks. Has much changed? So we've gone through, 150 plus years, and we're back to squats and planks as our fitness recommendation. So from a health standpoint and a performance standpoint, we've learned a lot about monitoring the human body, understanding our physiology, understanding our emotions. Yet human nature and what makes humans tick hasn't really changed very much. So we have to remember that the basics still hold. It's just how we monitor it and how we measure it is what I do for a living. But the basics of human physiology haven't changed. The 10 minutes will change your life concept. This truly is the simplest, easiest thing to make immediate change. It ties into our 1% objective, but the 10 minutes is something that you all have to put down. You have to figure out where your priority list is, though. Some of you, it may be family related. You're going to put your 10 minutes into something related to your spouse or your kid or your home life that you've been lacking on. Commit to it. If it's on the work front, commit to 10 minutes a day. If you always feel like 2:30 in the afternoon is when you're crashing, your lunch hasn't been appropriate maybe, and you get back, it's 2:30, you feel tired, pretty much the day's over for you mentally. So that 10 minutes, you may say at 2:15, that's my 10 minutes a day. I'm going to go do, in the office somewhere, I'm going to do some form of activation work, whether it's exercise, whether it's breathing work, whether it's emotional change, language stuff. I'm going to do something at that time period, 10 minutes a day, to make sure the last 3 hours or so I can be super productive. And that's, with our CEOs, that's one of the biggest changes we make. Because most of them have 3 or 4 periods a day where they're optimized. It's usually real early in the morning. They're up at 4 or 5 most of the time. They'll go 2 hours, and then they'll go work out, or they'll go have breakfast, or they'll see their kids or something. And then they'll get to work, and then they'll go hard for 2 hours, and then lunch will be something where there's a break. And then there's a window between lunch and about 4 where they struggle most of the time. And that's where we come in and we have strategies around that. And then they'll hit another window around 4:30 till 7. Then they'll usually go home, do something, see family, and then they'll hit their last window of productivity around 10:30 at night. So there's usually a 4 productivity window slot for most of these folks, because they don't function like a lot of other individuals that are very good at sitting and doing 6 hours kind of straight. Because really on point, they can do a lot in 6 hours, but once they're done with that, they're fried. You're not getting much more out of those people. They're a 6 hour a day, hard, straight through. They want to do it, they want to get it done. Normally they aren't the CEOs though. Normally they're the really high productive workers that you want on your team that are going to get a task accomplished. The CEOs are the ones that have 27 ideas going on at once. They got a lot of projects that are ongoing that they have to deal with, and they have to take off bite-sized chunks in different areas and then move on to the next one. So again, it's personality types that lead different individuals to different roles, but you have to be aware of that. And then the 10 minutes a day can truly change how you work with those individuals and how you do it. Sleep, really quick. I want to touch on I'm not going to say get your 8 hours. It'd be great if you did. What I want to do is how do we optimize whatever hours you can get? Make sure you set your room up for sleep. Meaning that, how many of you travel? Travel for work? Not too many, so that's good. That takes that big issue off the table. That's usually the hardest part, so we can save that for another day. Routines are really important. You want to have an hour or so window where you try to get to bed similar time frame. Could be late, but you want it to be consistent. Also, how many of you changed your phone to your black light or your blue light setting on your phone? Does anyone know that, what I'm talking about? Handful of you. If you don't know what I'm talking about, come see me after. I'll show you how to do it. Really simple, but I set it at about 9. I don't go to bed till about midnight, but I set it about 9:30 or 10. And it just changes the screen so you don't get the blue light as much. Really valuable to try to work it down before you go to bed. So really important concept. Minimize the TV watching unless you're watching boring stuff. Seriously. I watch Bloomberg at night before I go to bed. Puts you to sleep pretty quickly. So one of the things with that is the reason is you don't want to stimulate emotion before you go to bed. It's hard to go to bed after you've got excited. You know, that's why those late night shows, you understand why they're mainly comedy shows. They're trying to keep you up. That's the reason most of those late night shows have always been comedy shows, because they get you energized and awake. It's the last thing you want to watch before you go to bed. It's really, really smart from a behavioral standpoint why they do that. You don't see news very often at 11 or 12 at night. So there's a reason behind that. Avoid caffeine, obvious reason why. Fluids are a challenge because we want you to drink enough, but we want to have about a 2-hour window before you go to bed where you don't drink a lot. Okay, obvious reasons why. Napping, and I'll give you a nap solution that we use with our athletes. Productivity naps. This is one of the biggest advantages you can implement in your lifestyle. If you can find 30 to 40 minutes sometime throughout the day, these productivity or catch-up naps are huge, but you've got to do them right. The secret to high performance that a lot of you probably don't use is what's called the caffeine nap. You'll take a shot of espresso or 80 to 200 milligrams, depending on how much caffeine you're normally used to, somewhere in that ballpark, and you take that immediately before you take a nap. You set your alarm for 30 to 45 minutes. Make sure you get up at that point, and then the caffeine will be fully ready to work and working at a high level. You'll get your nap component there. You won't go into REM sleep, which is what we don't want to do. Because how many of you have taken a nap for an hour and a half, you wake up and you feel terrible? Yeah, that's because you screwed it up. Okay? That's literally, you screwed it up. Yeah? The way you want to nap is 30 to 45 minutes and up. And you can do it with or without caffeine, depending on if you're a caffeine person or not. But the caffeine naps, we do that a lot for our second or third training session of the day. So athletes will train twice, and then they'll come back for a late session. They'll take a nap, they'll do the caffeine nap, they'll be up out of the bed, they'll warm up for 10 minutes, and we'll be ready to go. And it's a very productive strategy. Some really good research showing the benefits of it as well. So something to take home and try in your environment. Control your controllables. So from this standpoint, short vacations are better than long vacations. Long vacations, you're trying to get away from something. Short vacations, you're trying to recharge. Big, big difference when it comes down to why you decide on the types of vacations you choose. The best people, the higher achievers, take very short vacations. They take a lot of them. They take 2-3 day vacations a lot. They don't take 2-week or 3-week vacations very often. A lot of reasons behind that. And pressure is a privilege. So I want to leave you with this slide because it's probably the most important thing that you can walk away with. If you're feeling stressed and if you're feeling pressured, think of it as a privilege because you're doing something that's making a difference. Thank you.